So welcome back. We're talking about the Surface Duo 2. Today's topic with our power duo, Brett and Matt here, is the Microsoft Whiteboard app. We talk a lot, Matt and I, about the multimodal computing experience in the context of the last 2 years where so many people have been shunted to working from home when they weren't used to working remotely. One of the things that they really lost access to, and it's been a big driver for adoption of these sorts of tools, is the whiteboard. So when we're meeting in an office, we've got a physical whiteboard. If you're really lucky, you might have a really awesome device like the Surface Hub that Matt's got sitting behind him there to whiteboard on. But whiteboarding is a really important process in the workplace because it's a tool that we use to innovate, to ideate, to solve problems, to come up with concepts and to share ideas and to really work together. This is the real, true nature of collaboration. In fact, we talk about this a lot, but we really believe that the actual collaboration, not coordination or cooperation, but collaboration where we're sharing and riffing off each other's ideas is only really possible in a what would you say, Matt? In a visual and creative way, right?
Yeah, it's got to be free form, no structure. It's got to be without structure and free form, and that's why whiteboards are ideal. That's why chalkboards, whiteboards have survived the test of time, because that concept of chalk and talk, is visual thinking, visual explaining, deep thinking, creativity. It's all tied in with that. Bottom line is that's creativity. It starts with free form and a pen.
Innovation, creativity. This stuff is messy, all right? Our brains do not think in linear patterns. It's not about typing from left to right down the page. We go off in all sorts of directions when we use a whiteboard. Most whiteboards that you'll see, if you look at one in the workspace that you're in, they are messy. Some of them are structured, but most of them, especially around creative discussions, are messy. So we want to be able to do that in the digital environment. And the Surface Duo is a tool that promises to be able to enable this. Like we could have a video conference and share a whiteboard at the same time on this device, on a tiny little device. I could be in the car somewhere and actually be able to participate effectively in this kind of creative, visual, and spatial discussion. So we do a lot of this whiteboarding. In fact, whenever we create a new piece of training content, we whiteboard it. Whenever we create a new presentation, we've been doing that a bit lately, we whiteboard it. How's that working on the Surface Duo 2? Have you done it much on your device, Matt?
A little. And we didn't mention this in the OneNote video, but running OneNote with my Teams calls is probably something I've moved towards more than using the Whiteboard app. I just find it a better functionality. If we had the desktop Whiteboard app, this would be a brilliant thing to do, but we don't. We've got essentially a web-based version of the Whiteboard app.
And that said, I mean, the web-based version of the whiteboard, this new whiteboard app that's on Android here, it did come briefly to Windows, then it got taken away. Again, it's still available on the web. It's the app that's on iOS as well. It's the same app. Microsoft were really driving to unify the apps and have the one experience. It got rolled back on Windows because it just wasn't good enough compared to the old app. But it is what they call, I think, a WebView 2 app. So it's some sort of app framework that they're using. It really is just a wrapper for a website that's sitting on the Surface Duo 2. That comes with it. It comes with some downsides. For example, it can be a little laggy if you grab your pen and scribble across the screen. Not going to perform like OneNote will. It does tend to sort of cut your curves and strokes off a little bit because of that web-based limitation, which is frustrating. But it's way better than the old Microsoft Whiteboard app on the web. So before we had an Android app, which wasn't that long ago, you could get to the Microsoft Whiteboard. You could actually use it via the web, but they've added a lot of features to it. A lot of the features that they've added to it are quite keyboard-centric, which we think is a real problem with what they're trying to do there at Microsoft. There's things like they want to put templates onto the page. They, it's all about text tools and those sorts of things. Yet there's plenty of pen stuff still there. Unfortunately, that's because Microsoft listened to their customers, and their customers don't get this stuff yet. They don't understand it. So the majority of people don't get why it's so important. They haven't really thought about why it's so important to whiteboard as a process, and they're trying to do it all with keyboards and mice. It's not going to work. They'll eventually get back here when they realize that this is the way to go. But yeah, so a lot of the features they've added there are very keyboard-centric. The keyboard's important, obviously very important, but it's at a later stage of the thinking process. Why is pen so important? don't know if you've got any input on that.
Yeah, well, I mean, there are lots of templates, and in fact, I was watching a Mike Tholfsen video just the other week, which talked about the Whiteboard app and the range of templates in it, and there's a lot. But if we're at a template stage, we've probably skipped over the creative process. We got to get.
We're trying to fit things into boxes, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes that can be helpful in the creative process to sort of direct it, but most of the time it's probably just unnecessary structure.
Yeah,
creativity is messy.
And this is something for us to perhaps talk about another time. But people seem to be a little bit scared of messiness when it comes to thinking and sharing ideas of others, and we've really got to get past that, because it's that messiness is where the best ideas live, and it's how they're sparked and created. Sharing those messy concepts with others is how we build them into things that do require templates and that do require documentation. But it's got to start with that ink freeform idea, and the Whiteboard app is the perfect space for that. We would just like to see the ink a bit more real time,
bit smoother, and a few more features. Like in the Windows app, you could do things like take a photo and drop it straight into the page, and that's missing in this version of the app.
Just going to say that, right? So bringing artifacts to create around into the Whiteboard app is what I love about the desktop version of the Whiteboard. I really, really love that, and we can't do that on the Android version. So we can't even take a screenshot and bring it into the page right now. So there's a bunch of stuff that's missing. And as they add those features back into this Whiteboard app, it'll get a lot better and a lot more interesting. But the key thing is here, I mean, aside from the limitations, and one of the other limitations, by the way, is that it'll only run in the portrait mode. So I want it to kind of span sideways. It won't do that. It'll only run like this, which is a little bit annoying. That said, you could have a Teams call on the top. You could have the Whiteboard on the bottom as a single app. It'll span. But it kind of does something funny there in terms of sizing. It really wants to be in the portrait mode. So you might have to go that way to make it really work. But you could be on a Teams call. You could be whiteboarding. I'm drawing on the whiteboard. You're drawing on it at the same time, and we're seeing each other's ink be added. So let me go off and do this little bit over here. You right over there, and we can actually collaborate in a similar way to what we might do on a physical whiteboard. In fact, we could go way beyond that. You could have many people collaborating at the same time, or working on the whiteboard at the same time. Yeah, and so that brings people remote together, right, doesn't it? So it doesn't matter where I am, I can ink with you about an idea or a concept. We don't have to be in the same room. We can be Melbourne to Brisbane apart, or even further, and we can together build ideas in ink.
Yeah, and so in the big picture of this, right, I mean, that is so important, and I think so missing in the last 2 years is that, people are working together remotely. Now we're suddenly aware that there was people who were remote before that we could work with because we got the tools to do it. This is one of the tools, though, that makes that a really rich experience, right? So it is there. It's an app that's available right on your Surface Duo 2. Not perfect yet. It's not where it needs to be, but it is still absolutely usable. And I've contributed to some of my own whiteboards just in the last week on that device. So, and when I say that, I've actually been working on a whiteboard on the Surface Hub. And I've remembered something that I wanted to add, a little point that I wanted to add, and I've pulled that up on the Surface Duo 2 and just scribbled it in with the Surface Pen. So it's really cool to be able to do that. That's the other thing about the whiteboards, sorry to keep talking, but is that a digital whiteboard can live on through the entirety of a project, right? Whereas a physical whiteboard, you got to rub it off at the end of the session. You lose it, or you take a photo of it. It's a static piece of content at that stage, whereas this is something that's constantly being shaped, something that you can refer back to, that you can add to as the project goes along. Digital whiteboards are pretty amazing from that perspective.
Now, Brett, in one of your recent videos, you talked about Zoom fatigue, right? And so what we know is that using a whiteboard as a focal point in the meeting can take away some of that fatigue of just eyeball to eyeball ourselves and others through the Teams call, right?
It's a point of focus, right?
It's a point of focus. So we get focused on the idea. We're not looking at whether you did your hair or your makeup today or not, right? We're focusing on the idea that we're building together, and it will make those meetings more inclusive, more productive, and we'll be less tired at the end of them because we're actually focused on building content.
Yep. So I could say the whiteboard app. Look, it's not 100%. It's not there yet. It's very usable, but it's not it's not perfect yet. It's not ideal just yet. On the Surface Duo 2, but it is a really interesting thing that that you can do with a Surface Duo 2. So
there's a challenge here for the whiteboard team, right? And so the same challenge, I see this in OneNote and Whiteboard. So in the forums that we're a part of, be they on Facebook or other places where the public talk about using OneNote, one of the things that we see a lot is people request more formality. I want
Yes.
more font styles, or I want more templates, I want more formality. That is the exact opposite of what OneNote and Whiteboard should be. They should be as low formality as possible, right? So less formality, free form thinking. And so the challenge is to keep that focus on building a quality paper replacement, messy app, right?
Yeah.
And we see garage projects like Journal, for example, try to tackle this in other ways. Too quickly, we ditch the low formality and move towards the high formality, right? So
we've got to embrace the messiness, embrace the creativity, the innovation. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, so in the next video, we're going to be talking about the camera experience of the Surface Duo 2. So if you haven't already, hit the like button, hit the subscribe, and make sure that you get the notifications so that you can join us next week for this discussion, and let us know what you think in the comments below.